Now that free agency is over, let's talk draft. Grassy Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. Yeah, it's almost the draft. It's like a month or so away. Grassy, and today we are going to be talking about the top 5 needs that the Green Bay Packers need to address in the 2024 NFL Draft. And while they did get Xavier McKinney, which definitely solves a ton of problems, they signed Josh Jacobs and let go of Aaron Jones, who's now with the purple incarnation of Satan.
Skull! Look how they massacred my boy.
There are still other positions that they need to address. Some have moved up in priority because of Xavier McKinney. We're going to break it all down today and go through what I think the Packers need to target in this upcoming draft. Before we get to that, I want to do some honorable mentions, positions that are not in my top 5, but I think are still important. The Packers could wind up targeting because they have 11 draft picks. The first being wide receiver. Now, Goody has spoken about this a couple of times. The receivers that the Packers had last year, they kind of were just like, let's see what happens. And what happened was pretty darn good. While it did take a little bit to get going, by the end of the season, the Packers had weapons. We're, of course, talking about Romeo Doubs. We're talking about Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, and the separation and the route running. You even got my guy, Bo Melton, out there. Now, the reason why this isn't in the top 5 is because we have a very young room of really good wide receivers that showed that they have gelled with Jordan Love pretty darn well. It is still a need, though, because while Christian Watson, when he's on the field, is an absolute playmaker, you do worry about him staying on the field. And on top of that, it wouldn't be the worst to get some veteran leadership there in that wide receiver room. But overall, I think the Packers are decently set at receiver. In addition, I wouldn't be surprised if the Packers targeted yet another outside linebacker. Preston Smith is definitely very, very solid, getting a little bit older. Rashawn Gary got a big old contract. I'm excited to see him on the field. But as it's always known, you can never have enough pass rushers. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the Packers targeted one on day 1 or day 2. And then finally, the Packers could always look to defensive line. Getting somebody next to Kenny Clark has been a mission for quite some time. They have guys like TJ Slayton, Devontae Wyatt, of course, but you could always use another body back there. Carl Brooks, I haven't forgotten about you either, but the Packers could wind up trying to address that at some point during this draft. And so with those out of the way, let's get into the top 5, starting with number 5, and that is offensive line. Now, of course, David Bakhtiari unfortunately being released after that catastrophic injury a couple years ago on New Year's Eve was just never the same, been on and off the field, dealing with knee issues, trying to get that leg better, was released. He's not even going to be ready until training camp, even though it looks like he intends to play this season, and I wish him all the best. But the Packers have a pretty solid offensive line, even without David Bakhtiari. Yeah, there were definitely times earlier in the season and midway that you were kind of going, oh, maybe this isn't so good. The pass protection and run protection is not great, but it really seems like they gelled as the season went along. Rasheed Walker proved himself to be a pretty damn good left tackle, and the Packers, they have some great players here. Now, where I think they could upgrade is definitely in the interior. I know you have Sean Ryan there, but you could definitely get another guard. You also could be looking at tackle. Yosh Nijman, he's with the Panthers now, and so there goes a depth piece. But with guys still like Elton Jenkins, Zach Tom, Rasheed Walker, and even Myers, who only has 1 year left on his contract, there should be a look ahead of, okay, who's going to be the next guy who's going to fit into either the interior offensive line or potentially at one of the tackle positions if they think one of those guys can't do the job. So I do imagine at day 1 or day 2, the Packers are going to target somebody. Goody has proven that he can draft offensive linemen really darn well. And so I have all the faith that not only is he going to target somebody, but they'll probably hit a home run with him as well. So yeah, offensive line is definitely a top 5 need for the Packers. It's not their most pressing need, but when you have a young franchise QB, it's a little important to protect him. Number 4, you got running back. Some shakeups with the running back position in free agency. Aaron Jones getting released. striking a dagger through my heart, going to the Minnesota Vikings, the purple incarnation of Satan. But besides that, the Packers did some other things as well. Josh Jacobs, they just signed him to a very front-loaded deal. 26 years old, Josh Jacobs did not have the best year last year, but was on a bad Oakland Raiders offense. And on top of that, was dealing with some injuries. However, in 2022, he was an absolute stud. The Packers are hoping that he is going to be able to get back to form, because if Josh Jacobs is able to do that, yeah, this is going to be a great contract. But there are still some concerns there with injuries and production. On top of that, in free agency, they brought back A.J. Dillon to a one-year super duper cheap deal, which is kind of just, hey, if it works out, cool. If it doesn't, also cool. They have Emmanuel Wilson back there as RB3. So this is a position that definitely needs to be looked at. I wouldn't be surprised if day 2, the Packers look and try and address running back, because at this point, they need a receiving back, because Josh Jacobs, he's solid, but he's averaging around 30 receptions per season. So he's definitely not a prototypical receiving back. A.J. Dillon, he's gotten better at that, but can definitely improve. And plus, it's kind of like a thunder and thunder dynamic. And we still need to see what we have out of Emmanuel Wilson. So the Packers definitely need to draft a running back, not only to kind of hedge their bets on in case anybody gets injured, but they need a different kind of dynamic weapon back there, something they don't have currently on the roster. So I wouldn't be surprised they target a receiving back relatively early, could be day 2. I don't think day 1 they would go for it, but get a running back, could potentially be our RB1 if Josh Jacobs doesn't work out, and this would kind of allow them to have a little bit of peace of mind in the backfield. Number 3, you got corner. That's right. Of course, you have the stud Jair Alexander back there, and I know there was all the talks, especially after the Carolina game, of, oh, is he going to get traded? Is he going to get moved? Doesn't seem like any of that is going to happen, so we can relax there. However, there is some concern when it comes to corner. They did re-sign Keyshawn Nixon, who I imagine is going to be playing at that spot, as well as returner. You have Carrington Valentine, who did a really nice job. They also brought back Ballantyne as well, but there are some questions surrounding Eric Stokes. Eric Stokes, who didn't play much last year, been dealing with this injury for quite a while, and while he's a speedster, you just don't know what he's got right now, and there's some concerns there. So if Eric Stokes is good, they're pretty much rocking with the secondary, then they just need to look at depth. However, I think that they're going to be a little bit more aggressive here. While they did deal with safety and free agency, now they have to look at the other part of the secondary. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if their day 1 pick is corner, and maybe they get a hybrid guy like a Cooper DeJean, maybe something like that, just to make them feel a little bit better about both positions. But overall, corner is definitely a top 3 need, because you just don't know about Eric Stokes. And while you have some great depth pieces there, some are signed on short contracts like Keyshawn Nixon, and others you just have questions about. And I would like to have less questions about who's going to be covering these wide receivers. Number 2, you still got the safety position. The Packers, they went out and they addressed their number 1 need prior to free agency, and that was to sign a safety, and they did that with the signing of Xavier McKinney. Only 24 years old, is going to be all over the field. I'm super excited to see how Jeff Hafley is going to utilize him, and that is going to be a staple, or hopefully he's going to be a staple of that secondary. However, past that point, it's a little problematic. Now, they do have flexibility in the draft because they got McKinney. That's the most important part about this signing. Not only did you get a really good player who's young, but you have flexibility that they don't need to target a safety right away. I imagine they're still going to do it relatively early on because you really have Anthony Johnson Jr. back there. There's no Rudy Ford, so you just need somebody to play opposite McKinney. Overall, I'm very happy that they finally addressed this position. I thought they were going to do it with Brian Branch last year, as many of you know. But overall, I feel a little bit better about the safety position. They just need to draft one more guy. I imagine maybe day 2 or an early day 3. We'll see what they decide to do. And then finally, the number 1 position of need the Packers need to address in the draft is middle linebacker. Now, they do have Quay Walker, who I'm super duper excited for. I think he's going to be an absolute monster. I'm excited to see how he's going to be under Jeff Hafley. They're moving to a 4-3, but they need more linebackers here. They have Isaiah McDuffie, who did pretty darn well last season, but they definitely need a third guy, and it is their position of most need. Now, they did sign Christian Welch during free agency, but again, that might be just a depth piece here. You have Devondre Campbell, who left. He's now with the 49ers, and he struggled a bit last year. And so, yeah, this is kind of the big hole over the middle that the Packers need to address. They already put first-round capital in it by drafting Quay Walker. They gave Devondre Campbell big money. So I imagine that they're going to address this relatively soon. In free agency, there's not really a ton of guys left besides just depth pieces. So I imagine pretty early on in the draft, they are going to be targeting middle linebacker because, like I said, they just need more bodies over there. So while I don't necessarily think they'll get a middle linebacker day one, I'd be shocked if they didn't address this at least on day two. And you might be thinking, Tom, you've said a lot of day one, day two. Yeah, because I think that a lot of these positions could go day one, day two, minus running back, probably not going to be on day one, offensive line, potentially. But overall, middle linebacker, in my opinion, is their biggest position of need, and I imagine it will get rectified in the draft. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Where do you see the holes on this Packers team? Are they going to go defense once again in the first round? Let me know what you think. You know, I send me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at TomGrossiComedy, all social media see down below. A big shout out and thank you to all the patrons and YouTube members for supporting this channel. And thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack, go.